Hello, my friends, welcome back. So, we have finished reading The Green Glass Sea. That means it is time to discuss. So, I'm going to ask you guys some questions, and I would love to hear your responses. As always, I'll put my email up here, and it's always linked in the description down below for you to send me your thoughts. And I'm going to ask you guys a couple of questions, and we're also going to read the note from the author that's in the back of the book. So, as a reminder, this book was historical fiction, and the historical fiction genre means that it is based on a real time period in history, but the actual story is fiction, it's made up. So Dewey and Suze are not real people, but some of the characters in this book are real, like Oppie, Dr. Oppenheimer, and of course when they talked about the president, right, Harry Truman or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they were both real people. And the gadget, right, and the hill were real places and real things, but the story that we were actually reading was made up. So I think historical fiction is really awesome because it's a lot more interesting than, just reading like a history textbook or just hearing just these facts and these dates. It makes the story kind of come alive and helps us learn more about it. But it's also sometimes hard to remember that the characters that we're reading about are made up, even though some of the history is real. So we're going to start with the author's note, and that is in the back of the book. A lot of books have author's notes, but I especially find them helpful in historical fiction or other books that are based on a true story, because usually the author kind of tells you about what is made up and what is actually real, and about the research that they did, because authors have to do a lot of research when they write a historical fiction book. All right, so the author's note says, in the mid-1940s, neither Los Alamos nor the site known as Trinity appeared on any maps, but they were and are very real places. And while Dewey and Suze and their families are fictional characters that I've placed into this historic setting, Dorothy McKibben, Robert Oppenheimer, and Richard Feynman, among many others, were real people working on what was called the Manhattan Project, the development of the atomic bomb. In the 60 years since the end of World War II, countless books have been written about them and their work. To find out more about the history of nuclear physics, the development of the bomb, or life on the Hill, the following sources are a good place to start. And the author listed out a bunch more different books and other resources where you could learn more about the real history. And I will include those in the description box down below if you're interested and want to learn more. So that was her note about, some of the people were made up and some of the people were real. And I wanted to go ahead and share some of my own facts about it before we get into the questions. So this book, it's told through the lives of two children mainly, Dewey and Suze, right? And their parents who are working on the development of what they call the gadget, because it was a secret, they couldn't talk about it. This was during World War II, which is in the 1940s, and the gadget ended up being what we now call the atomic bomb. So I'm not going to explain exactly how that works because it's really complicated and I'm not like a super fancy scientist or anything. But basically, it's a bomb that involves splitting an atom, which is a teeny, like you can't even see them, particle that everything is made up of, which you'll learn about more in school when you get older. But basically, it's a huge bomb that creates devastating effects, more than just a normal bomb that kind of blows stuff up. The atomic bomb is really damaging, and as we saw in the book, when they went to the Trinity site where the bomb was tested, there were animals that had basically been vaporized and just a shadow of them was left. The bushes that were there were charred to the point where they looked like skeletons of bushes, and it took the sand of the desert and turned it into glass. So it's a really intense bomb, and the American scientists worked on it to try to end World War II by developing this bomb. So there's a big debate still to this day about whether it was a good idea to use the bomb in the war or not. So we're not really going to get into that. That's more of like a middle school and high school level discussion. But what you do need to know is that the American military dropped 2 of these atomic bombs on Japan when they were fighting in World War II. So I wrote down dates here for me because you guys know I can't remember dates very well. But the Trinity test, where Dewey and Suze and Mrs. Gordon got up really early and they went and saw that big bright light, was on July 16th, 1945. And then a little bit less than a month later, the American military dropped the first atomic bomb, August 6th, on Hiroshima in Japan. And then on August 9th, they dropped the second atomic bomb on the city of Nagasaki in Japan. So these bombs killed more than 200,000 people in Japan. More than 200,000 people. That is just an unbelievable number of people. And it's very sad because a lot of these people, it included children. They were mostly civilians. So it wasn't military people who were fighting in the war. It was people who were living in their towns, in their homes, trying to live their life. And just like those animals got vaporized that we read about in the book, that happened to people too, which is really scary and really sad. And then people continued to die, not just from the explosion of the bomb, but that impact when they used the Geiger counter in the story to check and see if the glass was safe to take home or not. They were checking the radiation, which is kind of like a side effect. It's really hard to explain it. I don't understand it very well because I was never that good at chemistry or physics, but it's basically kind of like an invisible force that can make you sick, is kind of the easiest way to explain it. And that radiation comes from the atomic bomb. So people continue to die for months after the actual bomb hit their city because of that radiation. And it included not just in that main city, but towns outside of the city as well. So it's super sad, and it is something that really happened in real life. And a lot of the scientists, like we saw Mrs. Gordon in the story, started to realize that maybe she didn't agree with developing the bomb and that it shouldn't really be used. She was hoping that they wouldn't use it. So there's a lot of debate, and that's something that you're definitely going to learn a lot about in school when you study World War II in middle school and in high school. And like I said, there will be more resources linked down below if you're interested in learning more, because it is really interesting. So with all of that history in mind, I wanted to go ahead and ask you guys questions. Like I said, I always write them down. So I've got 4 questions. No, not 8, 4. 4 questions. 2 of them are about kind of the main story about Dewey and Suze, and then the other 2 are about more of the historical story about the gadget, the bomb, all of that stuff. All right, so my first question is, why didn't Suze want to be friends with Dewey at first? And why do you think she changed her mind? Because if you remember at the beginning, she was being really mean to Dewey. She was calling her mean names. She didn't want her to move into their house. But then by the end, they were really becoming almost like sisters. And question number 2 is that Suze changes a lot in this story, right? Not just about how she treats Dewey, but she changes and kind of grows as a person. So how does she change? You know, like what changes about her, and why do you think she changes? My third question, this one is more about the science and the history of it. Why do you think they had to keep the work of the scientists and the location of the hill so secret? And do you think the kids, based on the story that we read, did it seem like the kids ever figured out what their parents were working on? They were always calling it the gadget, but do you think they ever had an idea of what it was? All right, and question 4 is like pretty long, so I'm just gonna read it. So by the time they test the gadget, which we now know is the atomic bomb, Mrs. Gordon starts to worry about the possible consequences of the scientist's creation, even though her husband and a lot of the other scientists seem to be excited. Why do you think she starts to worry? And do you think that scientists in general should consider the consequences of their research? So a lot of the times people think about science as something you do, right? You just do some experiments, you figure things out. But scientific research is used in real life, and sometimes it's used for amazing things like to help cure diseases, but sometimes it's used for terrible things like bombs to kill people in a war. So do you think that the scientists who are doing that research should have the responsibility of thinking about what their research is going to be used for? So I know that's kind of like a high level question, you know, it sounds a little bit more high school level, but since you guys are so smart, I know that you can answer it. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this book. Like I said about every book that we read on here, this is one of my favorite books from when I was a kid, and I just remember thinking about it for a long time after I read it the first time. And I say the first time because I've reread this book a whole bunch of times. So thank you guys for listening to me read this book to you, and make sure you stay tuned for tomorrow where we are going to start a brand new book. All right, bye guys.